The Nexus Prime Academy floated in the void between three star systems, its massive ring structure rotating slowly against the backdrop of distant nebulae. Within its corridors, the future protectors of the Galactic Coalition trained under the watchful eyes of instructors who had seen countless wars across the galaxy. The Academy was a melting pot of species, each bringing their own strengths, traditions, and prejudices to the crucible of military training. Sarah-chan pressed her face against the viewport of the transport shuttle, watching the Academy grow larger as they approached the docking bay. At 19, she was one of the youngest humans ever accepted into the Coalition's premier military training facility. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and her small frame was dwarfed by the massive alien beings sharing the shuttle with her. A Xantharian warrior sat across from her, his crystalline skin reflecting the light from the viewports in prismatic rainbows. His forearms were folded across his chest, and his multifaceted eyes regarded her with what she could only interpret as mild disdain. The shuttle shuddered as it entered the Academy's artificial atmosphere, and Sarah felt her stomach lurch. She had trained for this moment her entire life, dreaming of representing humanity among the stars, but now that she was here, the reality was overwhelming. The other recruits around her were giants, both literally and figuratively. The Vorthak beside her stood nearly 8 feet tall, his 6 arms ending in hands that could probably crush her skull without effort. His telepathic abilities meant he could read surface thoughts, and Sarah tried desperately to think of anything other than how terrified she was. The docking bay was a cathedral of metal and energy fields, vast enough to accommodate ships from across the galaxy. As the recruits disembarked, Sarah found herself swept along in a tide of beings that represented the diversity of Coalition space. There were Kalari whose skin seemed to shimmer with gravitational fields, their movements causing small objects to orbit around them. A group of Theshan traders, their snake-like lower bodies coiling as they moved, discussed something in their musical language that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. Form ranks by species. The voice that boomed across the docking bay belonged to Instructor Vexhai, a Xantharian whose crystalline structure had been enhanced with military implants. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in the Outer Rim conflicts, and recruits immediately began organizing themselves into neat formations. Sarah looked around and felt her heart sink. There were only 6 humans among the nearly 200 new recruits. She joined the small cluster of her fellow humans, noting how they seemed just as overwhelmed as she felt. There was Marcus, a tall young man from the colony worlds whose family had military traditions going back centuries. Beside him stood Elena, whose cybernetic enhancements marked her as coming from the tech-heavy inner systems. The others she didn't recognize, but they all shared the same expression of determined uncertainty. As the formation settled, Sarah became acutely aware of the whispered conversations happening in alien languages around them. She didn't need to speak Xantharian or Vorthak to understand the tone. The other recruits were discussing the humans with a mixture of amusement and contempt. One of the Xantharians made a sound that might have been laughter, gesturing toward their group with one of his 4 hands. "Attention, recruits!" Instructor Vexhai's voice cut through the murmurs like a plasma blade through hull plating. "You are here because your species believe you represent their finest. You are here to prove that belief is not misplaced. For the next standard year, this academy will test every aspect of your capabilities. Many of you will not survive to graduation. Some of you will not survive the first week." His multifaceted eyes swept across the assembled recruits, pausing on the human formation. "The Coalition has room only for the strong. The galaxy is vast and full of dangers that will show no mercy to the weak or unprepared. If you are not ready to shed blood, sweat, and possibly your life for the greater good of all species, you should leave now." A heavy silence fell over the docking bay. No one moved. "Excellent," Vexhai continued. "You will now be assigned to your training cohorts. These groups will be your family, your support, and your competition for the duration of your time here. The bonds you form will either forge you into warriors worthy of the Coalition, or they will be the chains that drag you down to failure." As names were called and assignments made, Sarah found herself assigned to Cohort 12, along with 5 other recruits from different species. There was Kazak, the Vorthak whose telepathic abilities made him valuable for reconnaissance training. THYSS was a Kalari whose gravity manipulation would be crucial for zero-G combat scenarios. The most intimidating member of their group was Torgon, a Xantharian whose family line could be traced back to the original warrior philosophers who had first unified his species under the Coalition banner. The final 2 members of their cohort were humans. Besides Sarah, there was David Kim, whose quiet demeanor concealed what she would later learn was an exceptional tactical mind. The formation of mixed species cohorts was intentional, designed to teach recruits how to work with allies whose capabilities and thought processes were fundamentally different from their own. Their first destination was the Barracks Complex, a sprawling section of the academy where recruits would live in close quarters for the duration of their training. The corridors were wide enough to accommodate the largest species in the coalition, with varying gravitational fields to ensure all recruits could move comfortably. Environmental controls maintained atmospheres suitable for oxygen-breathing species while providing specialized areas for those with different requirements. As they walked, Torgon made his opinions known with typical Xantharian directness. "I fail to understand why the Coalition continues to accept human recruits," he said, his voice carrying the harmonic overtones that marked his species. "Your physical limitations are well documented. Your psychological profiles suggest emotional instability under stress. What possible contribution could you make to a military force?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but, before she could respond, David spoke up with surprising calm. "Our species may be physically weaker than yours, but we've survived wars on our homeworld for thousands of years. We're adaptable. We learn quickly. And we don't give up easily." Kazak's telepathic voice touched their minds, carrying undertones of amusement. The small human speaks of survival. Interesting. Most species our size would have been eliminated by natural selection long ago. Perhaps there is something to study here. The barracks were designed with modularity in mind, allowing for species-specific accommodations within shared spaces. Each cohort was assigned a common area where they would eat, study, and conduct briefings, surrounded by individual sleeping chambers adapted to each recruit's biological needs. Sarah's chamber was small but functional, with a bed sized for human proportions and environmental controls she could adjust for comfort. As evening fell on their first day, the cohort gathered in their common area for what Instructor Vexhai had called integration exercises. These were intended to help recruits from different species learn to communicate effectively and understand each other's capabilities and limitations. "We should establish our hierarchy," Torgon announced, his crystalline structure shifting colors as he spoke. "In Xantharian tradition, leadership belongs to those with the greatest physical and mental capabilities. I propose myself as cohort leader, with Kazak as second-in-command given his telepathic advantages." THYSS, whose gravitational field caused small objects to drift around her in lazy orbits, made a sound that might have been agreement. The Kalari find this acceptable. Leadership should follow capability. Sarah exchanged glances with David, recognizing the familiar pattern of assumptions about human inferiority. She had encountered it countless times during her preparation for the academy, but, here, surrounded by beings who could literally crush her without effort, it felt more personal and immediate. What if leadership isn't just about individual capability? David asked quietly. What if it's about understanding how to use everyone's strengths effectively? Kazak's mental voice carried a note of curiosity. An interesting perspective. Elaborate, human. Each of us brings something different to this group, David continued. Torgon has physical strength and military tradition. Kazak has telepathic abilities that could be crucial for communication and intelligence gathering. THYSS can manipulate gravity, which opens up tactical possibilities the rest of us can't even imagine. Sarah and I may not have enhanced abilities, but we think differently. We solve problems in ways that might not occur to species with more specialized advantages. Torgon's colors shifted to what Sarah was learning indicated skepticism. Pretty words, but words do not win battles. When we face real challenges, your creative thinking will not protect you from enemy weapons. As if summoned by his comment, the common area's communication system activated, and Instructor Vexhai's image appeared in the holographic display. Cohort 12, you are hereby ordered to report to Training Base 7 for your first combat assessment. You have 15 minutes to arrive in full gear. The scramble to prepare was chaotic. Each species had different equipment requirements, and the armories were designed to accommodate the vast diversity of coalition forces. Sarah's gear felt familiar, a standard-issue energy rifle scaled to human proportions, lightweight armor that provided protection without restricting movement, and a tactical interface that would link her to her cohort mates during exercises. Training Base 7 was a massive chamber that could be reconfigured to simulate different combat environments. As Cohort 12 entered, they found themselves facing a holographic landscape of broken terrain, scattered cover, and multiple objectives marked with glowing indicators. Other cohorts were already engaged in their assessments, and the sound of energy weapons and shouted commands filled the air. "Your objective is simple," announced the training supervisor, a grizzled Theshan whose scarred hide spoke of decades of combat experience. "Secure the 3 objectives marked in red, while defending against automated opponents. You will be graded on teamwork, tactical thinking, and individual performance. Begin when the tone sounds." The assessment that followed was a disaster for Cohort 12, at least from a traditional perspective. Torgon charged forward with typical Xantharian aggression, his crystalline armor deflecting enemy fire as he engaged the automated opponents in close combat. His physical prowess was undeniable. Each strike of his forearms sent holographic enemies flying, and his natural armor made him nearly invulnerable to the training weapons. Kazak used his telepathic abilities to coordinate with Torgon, his mental voice allowing for instantaneous communication that gave them a significant advantage in the fast-paced environment. THYSS manipulated gravitational fields to create cover and redirect enemy projectiles, her unique abilities making her invaluable for both offense and defense. But the humans struggled. Sarah found herself constantly seeking cover, her smaller size and lighter armor making her vulnerable to enemy fire. David's tactical suggestions were sound, but, in the chaos of combat, it was difficult for their alien teammates to process and implement his strategies quickly enough to be effective. The exercise ended with Cohort 12 achieving only one of the 3 objectives, ranking them near the bottom among the day's participants. As they gathered for debriefing, the disappointment was evident in their alien teammates' body language. "This was predictable," Torgon stated bluntly. "The humans are a liability. Their physical limitations compromise our effectiveness as a unit." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Getting emotional would only reinforce the stereotypes about human instability. Instead, she looked at the tactical display showing their performance metrics. "Look at the coordination scores," she said, pointing to the data. "When we worked together, our efficiency ratings were actually higher than average. The problem wasn't our individual weaknesses, it was that we didn't have a plan that accounted for them." David nodded, studying the display. The cohorts that scored highest weren't necessarily the ones with the strongest individual members. They were the ones that used their diverse abilities most effectively. Look at Cohort 3, they have a Vorthack, 2 Theshans, and a human, but they achieved all objectives because they had a strategy that played to each member's strengths. Kazak's mental voice carried thoughtfulness. Asterisk, the humans make valid points. Perhaps our approach was flawed. THYSS, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke. The Kalari teach that strength comes not from the individual, but from the harmony of the group. Perhaps we should listen to the humans' suggestions. As the days passed, Cohort 12 began to find their rhythm. Sarah discovered that her smaller size and agility made her ideal for reconnaissance and infiltration exercises. David's strategic thinking proved invaluable in complex scenarios that required long-term planning rather than immediate action. Most importantly, they began to develop the trust and communication that would be essential for their survival. But not everyone at the academy was pleased with their progress. As word spread that a cohort with humans was beginning to perform respectably, some of the more traditionalist instructors and recruits began to take notice. There was a growing sense among certain factions that the humans were receiving special consideration, that the standards were being lowered to accommodate their limitations. The tension came to a head during a particularly challenging training exercise in zero gravity. The entire academy was watching as the top-performing cohorts competed in a complex scenario involving multiple objectives, hostile environments, and time pressure. Cohort 12 had earned their place in this advanced exercise through weeks of steady improvement, but their presence was controversial. "They don't belong here," Sarah overheard one of the Xantharian recruits saying to his cohort mates. "This exercise is meant to test the limits of coalition warriors. Including weak species like humans diminishes the value of success." The comment stung because Sarah knew there was truth to it. Physically, she and David were the weakest members of any cohort in the exercise. In terms of raw capability, they couldn't match their alien teammates. But they had proven that warfare wasn't just about individual strength, it was about how effectively a team could work together. The zero-gravity exercise took place in a massive spherical chamber that simulated the interior of a damaged space station. Multiple levels, rotating sections, and environmental hazards created a three-dimensional maze where traditional tactics had little meaning. The objective was to rescue simulated civilians while neutralizing hostile forces and preventing a reactor overload. Sarah found herself floating through a corridor barely wide enough for her frame, using her smaller size to access areas that would be impossible for larger species. Her mission was to reach the reactor control room and stabilize the overload while her teammates dealt with hostiles and evacuation routes. As she maneuvered through the zero-gravity environment, Sarah felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. In space, her lack of physical strength was less of a disadvantage. Her agility and spatial awareness, honed by years of three-dimensional thinking, allowed her to move through the complex environment with surprising grace. But, as she approached the reactor control room, Sarah encountered unexpected resistance. A group of advanced training androids, programmed to simulate elite enemy forces, had taken positions around the critical area. Their sensors were calibrated to detect and engage larger targets, but they seemed less responsive to her smaller energy signature. Using hand signals to communicate with her team through the tactical network, Sarah began to formulate a plan. Instead of trying to fight through the androids directly, she could use her size and stealth capabilities to reach the control room undetected while her teammates created a diversion. The plan worked perfectly. As Torgon and Kazak engaged the androids in spectacular combat, drawing their attention and sensor focus, Sarah slipped through their perimeter like a shadow. The reactor controls were complex, designed to challenge the technical capabilities of coalition species, but her human intuition and pattern recognition allowed her to identify the critical adjustments needed to prevent overload. With the reactor stabilized and hostiles neutralized, Cohort 12 had achieved one of the best times in the exercise. More importantly, they had demonstrated that the integration of human capabilities with alien strengths could produce results that neither could achieve alone. But success bred resentment. As they prepared to leave the training bay, Sarah noticed a group of recruits from other cohorts gathering near the exit. Their body language was aggressive, and she could hear fragments of conversation that suggested trouble. "Time to put the humans in their place," one of them was saying. "They've gotten too comfortable thinking they belong here." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air of the academy corridors. She had known this moment would come eventually. Despite their successes, despite proving their worth time and, again, there would always be those who saw humans as inferior beings who didn't deserve to train alongside the galaxy's elite. As Cohort 12 approached the group, Sarah could see that the confrontation was inevitable. The other recruits had positioned themselves to block the corridor, and their intentions were clear. This wasn't going to be a friendly discussion about training techniques or interspecies cooperation. What happened next would test everything Sarah had learned about courage, loyalty, and what it meant to be human in a galaxy that didn't believe her species belonged among the stars. The corridor leading away from Training Base 7 felt longer than usual as Cohort 12 walked through it, their successful exercise still fresh in everyone's minds. Sarah could feel the adrenaline slowly leaving her system, replaced by the familiar satisfaction of a mission well executed. David was quietly discussing tactical improvements with Kazak, their human-alien partnership having grown stronger with each passing week. Even Torgon seemed pleased with their performance, his crystalline structure glowing with colors that Sarah had learned indicated contentment. But the good mood evaporated the moment they rounded the corner and saw the group waiting for them. 7 recruits from various cohorts had positioned themselves across the corridor, making it impossible to pass without confrontation. Sarah recognized most of them from the training halls and mess facilities, but they had never interacted directly. At the center of the group stood Vex Thor, a Xantharian whose family lineage could be traced back to the War Masters of the 4th expansion. His crystalline structure was more pronounced than Torgon's, with sharp edges and angular features that spoke of generations of selective breeding for combat effectiveness. Beside Vex Thor stood 2 Vorthak brothers, their telepathic abilities making them valuable assets in any conflict. Sarah had seen them in training exercises, where their mental coordination allowed them to operate as a perfect unit, anticipating each other's actions with supernatural precision. Their 6 arms moved in subtle patterns that she recognized as preparation for combat, not the formal stances taught in training, but the loose readiness of experienced fighters. The rest of the group included a Kalari whose gravitational field caused visible distortions in the air around her, 2 more Xantharians whose colors indicated aggression and contempt, and a Theshan whose coiled lower body was tense with anticipation. They had clearly been waiting for this moment, planning this confrontation. Well, Vex Thor's voice carried the harmonic undertones that made Xantharian speech sound like crystal chimes in a storm. The heroes of Cohort 12. I hear your little performance in the exercise has impressed the instructors. Torgon stepped slightly forward, his own colors shifting to match the aggressive patterns displayed by the blocking group. Vexthor. I should have known you would be behind this. Your cohort's performance in the same exercise was adequate. I trust you're not here to ask for training advice. The insult was subtle but clear, and Sarah saw Vexthor's structure brighten with anger. Among Xantharians, questioning someone's combat performance was tantamount to questioning their entire genetic lineage. But, instead of responding to Torgon, Vexthor's multifaceted eyes focused on the two humans. I'm not here to discuss training with fellow warriors, he said, his tone making it clear that he didn't consider humans to be included in that category. I'm here to address a contamination that threatens the integrity of this academy. Sarah felt David tense beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. Getting into a verbal sparring match with Vexthor would only make the situation worse. Better to let Torgon handle the diplomatic aspects while she and David looked for ways to de-escalate the confrontation. Choose your words carefully, Kazak's telepathic voice touched the minds of everyone present, carrying undertones of warning. Cohort 12 has earned its place through merit and performance. Any insult to them is an insult to all of us. One of the Vorthak brothers laughed, the sound harsh and grating. Merit? Performance? They completed one exercise with adequate results, and, suddenly, they're heroes? Look at them, they're barely half the size of real warriors. They carry weapons designed for children. Their armor wouldn't stop a training bolt, let alone real enemy fire. The Kalari in the blocking group spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species. The gravitational distortions they create are negligible. In close combat, they would be brushed aside like debris in a solar wind. Why does the Coalition continue to waste resources training beings who will never be effective warriors? Sarah had heard these arguments countless times before, but hearing them stated so bluntly in front of her teammates was different. She could feel the anger building in her chest, but, more than that, she could see the doubt creeping into THYSS's expression. Their Kalari teammate had grown to respect the humans over the past weeks, but the comments were clearly having an effect. Because, David said quietly, stepping forward despite Sarah's restraining hand, warfare isn't just about individual strength. It's about adaptability, creativity, and the ability to work as a team. Those are things humans bring to the Coalition that pure physical power can't replace. Vexthor's structure shifted to deeper reds and purples, colors that Sarah had learned indicated contempt mixed with amusement. Spoken like someone who has never faced real combat. Tell me, little human, what happens when your creativity meets a plasma cannon designed to melt through battle armor? What happens when your adaptability encounters an enemy who can move faster than your nervous system can process? The Theshan in the group uncoiled slightly, his snake-like lower body moving in patterns that brought him closer to the humans. In the Rim Wars, I saw entire human colonies fall in minutes when real warriors came to claim them. Your species talks about courage and determination, but, when faced with superior force, you break just like any other weak species. Sarah felt something snap inside her chest. She had tolerated the insults to her own capabilities, accepted the questioning of her place at the academy, even endured the constant doubt about whether humans belonged among the Coalition's elite. But, hearing her species' struggles dismissed as weakness, their suffering treated as evidence of inferiority, that was too much. You're right, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Humans are smaller, weaker, and more fragile than most Coalition species. We don't have natural armor, or telepathic abilities, or the power to manipulate gravity. But, you know what we do have? She stepped closer to Vexthor, ignoring the fact that he towered over her and could probably kill her with a single blow. We have the ability to keep fighting when any logical species would surrender. We have the stubbornness to refuse defeat even when victory seems impossible. And, most importantly, we have the ability to care about something more than our own survival. The corridor had fallen silent except for the ambient hum of the Academy's life support systems. Even the blocking group seemed taken aback by Sarah's sudden intensity. During the colony wars, yes, human settlements fell to superior firepower, she continued. But, they fell fighting. They fell protecting each other. They fell making sure that their children and elderly had time to escape, even when they knew they couldn't save themselves. That's not weakness, that's courage in its purest form. Vexthor's colors shifted to patterns Sarah didn't recognize, but his tone remained dismissive. Pretty words about sacrifice and courage.
But this isn't philosophy class, human.
This is military training. When we graduate from this academy, we'll be protecting the coalition from threats that could destroy entire star systems. Your noble sentiments won't stop a devourer's assault fleet or avoid stalker infiltration. Maybe not, David interjected, but our perspective might help find solutions that pure military thinking would miss. The greatest victories in coalition history haven't come from overwhelming force, they've come from unexpected strategies and innovative thinking. One of the Vorthak brothers made a gesture of dismissal with 4 of his 6 arms.
Innovations like running away faster? Like hiding more effectively?
Your species contributes nothing to the coalition except another mouth to feed and another weak point to protect. The insult was clearly intended to provoke a response, and Sarah felt David's anger spike beside her. But, before either human could react, something unexpected happened. THYSS stepped forward, her gravitational field causing small pieces of debris to orbit around her in agitated patterns. The Vorthak speaks from ignorance, she said, her musical voice carrying undertones of authority.
I have trained with these humans for weeks. I have seen their contributions to our cohort's success.
They think differently than we do, and that difference has made us stronger. Vexthor's attention shifted to THYSS, his colors indicating surprise.
You would defend these weaklings? A Kalari of noble lineage, standing with inferior species against your own kind?
The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see the moment of decision playing out in THYSS's expression. She was being forced to choose between social acceptance among the elite species and loyalty to teammates who had proven their worth through actions rather than genetics.
I stand with my cohort, THYSS said simply. As any true warrior would. The response clearly wasn't what Vexthor had expected.
His structure flashed through several color patterns before settling on deep reds that indicated growing anger.
So be it.
If you choose to associate with inferiors, you can share their fate.
The threat was clear enough that even someone unfamiliar with interspecies politics couldn't miss it.
Sarah felt the situation escalating beyond verbal sparring into something more dangerous. The other recruits in the blocking group were shifting into positions that suggested they were preparing for physical confrontation. Stand aside, Torgon said, his own colors matching Vexthor's aggressive patterns. We have no quarrel with any of you, but we will not be intimidated by bullies who attack those smaller than themselves.
Bullies?
The Theshan laughed, the sound like wind through broken glass.
We're teaching necessary lessons. The coalition has grown soft, accepting weak species out of misguided compassion rather than practical necessity. It's time to remind everyone what real strength looks like.
What happened next occurred so quickly that Sarah almost missed it. The Theshan's coiled body suddenly unsprung, launching him forward with surprising speed toward David, who was closest to him.
It wasn't a training exercise or a formal challenge, it was a real attack, intended to cause serious injury.
David tried to dodge, but he was too slow. The Theshan's massive form would have crushed him against the corridor wall, potentially breaking bones or worse. Sarah watched in horror as her teammate faced an attack he had no hope of defending against. But, before the Theshan could complete his strike, Sarah moved. She didn't think about the size difference, or the fact that intervening would put her in even greater danger than David had been facing. She didn't calculate odds or consider alternative strategies. She saw someone she cared about in danger, and her body reacted before her mind could process the implications. Sarah threw herself between the attacking Theshan and David, her smaller frame taking the full impact of the alien strike. The collision sent her flying backward into David, both of them crashing into the corridor wall with enough force to drive the breath from their lungs. Pain exploded through Sarah's ribs and left shoulder where the Theshan's attack had connected, but she pushed herself up immediately, placing herself between the attacker and her teammate. Her energy rifle was in her hands without conscious thought, its charging indicator glowing amber as the weapon prepared to fire. The next one of you who moves toward my teammate gets a plasma bolt between the eyes, she said, her voice steady despite the pain radiating through her torso. I don't care how strong your armor is, or how tough your species thinks it is.
This weapon will put you down.
The corridor erupted into chaos. The Vorthak brothers were reaching for their own weapons while simultaneously attempting to coordinate through their telepathic link. Vexthor's colors shifted to patterns of rage and disbelief that a human would dare threaten coalition recruits.
The Kalari in the blocking group began generating gravitational distortions that could crush unprotected opponents.
But Cohort 12 was also moving. Kazak's telepathic abilities were reaching out to coordinate defensive positions while Torgon's crystalline structure blazed with combat patterns. THYSS's gravitational field began to interact with the hostile Kilaris, creating visible distortions in the air between them.
Stand down.
The voice that cut through the chaos belonged to Instructor Vexai, who appeared at the end of the corridor with 2 other Academy staff members. His authority was absolute, and all the recruits immediately froze in their aggressive postures. The instructor's multifaceted eyes swept across the scene, taking in the battle-ready stances, the drawn weapons, and Sarah still standing protectively in front of David despite her obvious injuries. His colors shifted through patterns that Sarah couldn't read, but his tone carried deadly seriousness.
Weapons down. All of you. Now.
The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of energy weapons powering down and the ambient hum of the Academy's systems. Sarah felt her rifle growing heavy in her hands as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the realization of what had just occurred. She had threatened fellow coalition recruits with lethal force. She had inserted herself into a conflict that could have serious diplomatic implications between species. Most importantly, she had proven something that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity. When someone she cared about was in danger, a human wouldn't hesitate to face impossible odds to protect them.
Medical team to Corridor 7 Alpha, Instructor Vexai spoke into his communication device. We have injured recruits requiring immediate attention.
As the medical team arrived and began examining Sarah's injuries, she caught sight of the expressions on the faces around her. The blocking group looked stunned, as if they had witnessed something they couldn't quite believe. Her own teammates showed a mixture of pride, concern, and something that might have been awe. But it was the look in Vexthor's multifaceted eyes that would stay with her.
For the first time since she had known him, the arrogant Xantharian warrior looked uncertain.
He had just witnessed something that contradicted everything he thought he knew about human nature. A mortal girl with no enhanced abilities had stepped between certain harm and someone who needed protection, without hesitation and without regard for her own safety.
The galaxy was about to learn what that meant.
The medical bay of Nexus Prime Academy was a testament to the Coalition's commitment to accommodating the diverse biological needs of its member species. Healing chambers designed for different atmospheric requirements lined the walls, while medical staff from across the galaxy worked to treat everything from Xantharian crystal fractures to Vortac neural disorders. Sarah found herself in a human-scaled treatment pod, the bioscanners mapping the extent of her injuries with methodical precision. 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and extensive bruising along her left side. The medical report painted a clear picture of what happened when a human-sized body intercepted an attack meant for someone much larger. The automated healing systems were already at work, flooding her system with accelerated healing compounds and cellular repair nanites, but the physical injuries were only part of what she was dealing with.
Word of the corridor incident had spread through the Academy faster than a plasma discharge through a ship's hull.
Within hours, every recruit, instructor, and support staff member knew that a human cadet had interposed herself between an attacking Theshan and her teammate, then drawn her weapon and threatened to kill anyone who came closer.
The story grew with each telling, acquiring details and interpretations that sometimes bore little resemblance to reality. Some versions portrayed Sarah as a reckless fool who had escalated a minor disagreement into a life-threatening confrontation.
Others painted her as a hero who had stood up to bullies when no one else would. A few suggested that the entire incident had been staged to generate sympathy for the human program. But, regardless of the specific details, everyone agreed on one fundamental point: something significant had happened in that corridor, something that challenged basic assumptions about human nature and capabilities. David sat in the chair beside her healing pod, his own minor injuries having been treated quickly. The medical scanners had detected signs of concussion from when they had been thrown against the wall, but his condition was stable. What concerned Sarah more than his physical state was the expression on his face, a mixture of gratitude and guilt that she recognized all too well. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly, not needing her eyes.
"I could have handled it. I've been in fights before."
Sarah tried to shift position and immediately regretted it as pain shot through her ribs. The healing process was accelerated by Coalition medical technology, but it still required time to complete.
"You would have been seriously hurt. Possibly killed. That Theshan wasn't pulling his punches."
"And you could have been killed instead," David countered. "You're not invulnerable just because you're brave. If that hit had connected differently, we might be planning your funeral right now." The words hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of truth that neither wanted to acknowledge. Sarah's intervention had been successful, but only barely. If the Theshan strike had hit her head instead of her torso, or if she had been thrown into the wall at a different angle, the outcome could have been very different.
Someone had to do something, Sarah said finally. It happened so fast that there wasn't time to think about alternatives.
I saw you in danger, and I reacted. The medical bay's door hissed open to admit Instructor Vexhai, his crystalline structure reflecting the soft lighting and patterns that Sarah was learning to read as contemplative.
Behind him came Dr. Thyra Kelson, the Academy's human liaison officer, whose presence immediately made Sarah nervous.
Dr. Kelson's job was to monitor human cadets and ensure they were adapting successfully to the multi-species environment. Her involvement suggested that the incident was being treated as more than just a training accident.
Cadet Chen, Instructor Vexhai's harmonic voice carried none of its usual military authority. How are you feeling?
Ready to return to training, sir, Sarah replied automatically, then winced as the movement aggravated her healing ribs. Dr. Kelson stepped forward, her expression mixing concern with professional assessment. She was in her 40s, with graying hair and the kind of steady demeanor that came from years of dealing with interspecies diplomatic situations. Sarah, we need to discuss what happened in that corridor. The incident report is already drawing attention from Coalition Command. Sarah felt her stomach sink. Attention from Coalition Command was never good news, especially for incidents involving humans.
The political implications of the Academy's human program were always delicate, balanced precariously between military necessity and interspecies politics. Before we begin, Instructor Vexhai said, I want to make something clear. The investigation has determined that you acted in defense of a teammate who was facing unprovoked aggression. The Theshan who attacked has been charged with assault and will face disciplinary action. Your response was within Academy regulations for protecting fellow cadets. The relief Sarah felt was overwhelming, but it was tempered by Dr. Kelson's next words. However, the liaison officer continued, your actions have created a situation that extends far beyond Academy discipline. The other species are talking, Sarah. They're asking questions about human psychology, about whether your reaction represents typical behavior for your species or an anomaly. Sarah exchanged glances with David, recognizing the implications. If her response was seen as representative of human nature, it could either elevate the perception of her species or paint them as dangerously unpredictable. Either outcome could have consequences for the human program and for Earth's standing within the coalition. What kind of questions? David asked. Instructor Vexhai's colors shifted through patterns that Sarah couldn't identify.
The primary concern relates to psychological stability under stress. Most species have predictable responses to threat situations, fight, flight, or freeze reactions that can be trained and accounted for.
Your response defied those patterns. Dr.
Kelson pulled up a holographic display showing psychological profiles and behavioral analysis charts. When faced with a threat to yourself, the expected human response would be defensive, seeking cover, calling for help, or attempting to de-escalate. When faced with a threat to a teammate, the expected response would be to coordinate with the rest of your unit for a tactical response.
You did neither.
Instead, Instructor Vexhai continued, you placed yourself in greater danger to protect someone else, then escalated the confrontation by threatening lethal force against superior numbers. From a tactical perspective, your actions were illogical and potentially catastrophic. Sarah felt defensive anger rising in her chest. So I should have let David get hurt because the tactical situation wasn't favorable? I should have stood back and calculated odds while my teammate was being attacked? That's exactly the question being debated in the upper levels of the coalition, Dr. Kelson said.
Is this kind of protective instinct an asset or a liability? Does it represent admirable loyalty or dangerous unpredictability?
The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the rest of Cohort 12. Torgon's crystalline structure was still showing traces of the aggressive patterns from the corridor confrontation, while Kazak's telepathic presence carried undertones of concern.
THYSS moved carefully, her gravitational field subdued as she approached Sarah's healing pod.
The Academy is buzzing with discussion, Torgon announced without preamble.
Some are calling you a hero. Others are suggesting that humans are too emotionally unstable for military service.
A few are proposing that the incident proves your species should be restricted to support roles rather than combat positions. Kazak's mental voice touched their minds with careful precision. The most interesting conversations are happening among the instructors.
They are reviewing human historical data, trying to understand whether Sarah's actions represent typical behavior for your species, and what are they finding? David asked.
Dr. Kelson manipulated the holographic display to show historical data files.
That's where things get complicated.
Human military history is full of similar incidents, individuals placing themselves in harm's way to protect others, often against overwhelming odds. It's so common that we have specific terms for it: heroism, sacrifice, valor. But what makes this particularly significant, Instructor Vexhai added, is that it occurred in a training environment where such extreme responses weren't expected or necessary. The psychological profile suggests that for humans, the protective instinct operates independently of rational threat assessment.
THYSS spoke for the first time since entering the medical bay.
Among the Kalari, we have observed this pattern in other species, but usually only between genetic relatives or mated pairs. The humans appear to extend these protective behaviors to chosen companions.
The observation hung in the air like a revelation.
Sarah realized that what felt natural to her, protecting someone she considered a friend and teammate, was being analyzed as an unusual psychological trait with potential military applications. The Strategic Planning Division is particularly interested in this aspect, Dr. Kelson continued. They're asking whether human protective instincts could be leveraged for specialized mission roles, or whether they represent an unacceptable risk factor.
Sarah tried to process the implications.
Her split-second decision to protect David was being dissected by military analysts and alien psychologists, turned into data points and strategic assessments. The deeply personal act of protecting someone she cared about was becoming a matter of interspecies politics and military planning. There's more, Instructor Vexhai said, his colors shifting to patterns that Sarah was beginning to recognize as indicating important information. The incident has attracted attention from off-station.
Coalition intelligence has requested detailed reports, and there are indications that other species are conducting their own analyses of human behavior patterns.
The medical pod's healing cycle completed with a soft chime, and Sarah felt the restraints releasing as her injuries were deemed sufficiently treated for her to move around. She sat up carefully, testing her range of motion and finding that while she was still sore, the major damage had been repaired.
What does this mean for the human program? She asked. Dr. Kelson's expression was grim.
That depends on how the coalition chooses to interpret your actions. If they decide that human protective instincts are valuable military assets, it could open doors for your species that have been closed until now. If they conclude that humans are too unpredictable for reliable military service.
She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the medical bay understood the implications.
The human program at the academy was still experimental, still subject to cancellation if the results weren't deemed worthwhile.
Sarah's actions could either secure humanity's place among the coalition's military elite or provide the justification for excluding them entirely.
There is one other factor to consider. Kazak's mental voice carried undertones of something that might have been respect. The reaction among the other recruits has been unexpected.
Many are expressing admiration for Sarah's actions, even among species that previously dismissed humans as weak. Admiration? David asked.
Torgon's colors shifted to patterns that Sarah was learning indicated agreement. The display of protective behavior has impressed many recruits.
Among Xantharians, the willingness to face superior odds for the sake of others is considered a mark of true warrior spirit. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah.
The same action that was being analyzed as potentially dangerous by military planners was being praised by the very alien recruits who had previously dismissed humans as unfit for military service. However, Instructor Vexhai continued, there has also been a negative reaction among certain groups. Some recruits are interpreting your actions as evidence that humans are emotionally unstable and prone to irrational behavior. They're arguing that anyone who would take such risks is unfit for positions of military responsibility. The divide was becoming clear. Sarah's actions had polarized opinion throughout the academy, forcing everyone to take sides on the question of whether human protective instincts were an asset or a liability. The neutral ground where humans had been struggling to prove themselves was disappearing, replaced by strong opinions on both sides.
What happens now? Sarah asked. Dr.
Kelson closed the holographic display and turned to face her directly.
Now we wait. The Coalition Council is reviewing the incident report and the psychological analysis. They'll make a decision about the future of the human program within the next few days. In the meantime, Instructor Vexhai added, you return to training. Your cohort has exercises scheduled for tomorrow morning, and the academy operates on the principle that training continues regardless of political considerations. As the official visitors left the medical bay, Sarah found herself alone with her cohort mates. The weight of responsibility was settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Her actions hadn't just affected her own future, they had potentially determined the fate of every human in the coalition military. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't think about the consequences when I acted. I just saw David in danger and reacted. Don't apologize, THYSS said firmly. You did what a true warrior would do. You protected your cohort mate without regard for personal cost. That is honorable, regardless of what the politicians decide. Torgon's colors shifted to patterns of approval. The Kalari speaks truth. Your actions have earned respect among those whose opinions matter. The rest is politics. But, as Sarah prepared to return to her quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that the politics might be the most important factor of all. Her moment of instinctive protection had set forces in motion that were beyond her control, forces that would determine whether humanity's future lay among the stars or confined to the margins of galactic society. The corridor incident had been just the beginning. What came next would test not just Sarah's courage, but the courage of an entire species as they fought for their place in the galaxy. 3 days after the corridor incident, Nexus Prime Academy received an emergency transmission that changed everything. The message came through on priority channels reserved for genuine crises, its authentication codes verified by Coalition Command itself. As alarms echoed through the Academy's corridors and emergency lighting bathed everything in amber warnings, every recruit understood that their training was about to become very real. Sarah stood with Cohort 12 in the main briefing hall, watching as Commandant Zarthal took the podium. The massive Zentharian's crystalline structure blazed with colors that indicated extreme urgency, his forearms moving in precise gestures as he addressed the assembled Academy population. Attention all personnel, his harmonic voice carried easily across the vast chamber. We have received a distress signal from Research Station Kepler-7, located in the disputed region near the void border. The station has gone silent following reports of unknown hostile activity. All attempts at communication have failed. A holographic display materialized above the podium, showing the location of Kepler-7 in relation to Coalition space. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the coordinates. The void border was where the galaxy's most dangerous threats emerged: ancient machines, reality-warping entities, and, worse things that existed in the spaces between stars. Due to the station's classified research and strategic importance, Commandant Zarthal continued, Coalition Command has authorized an immediate rescue and investigation mission. Given the proximity to Academy training grounds and the need for rapid response, senior cohorts will participate in this operation alongside regular Coalition forces. The hall erupted in excited murmurs as recruits realized what this meant. Instead of simulated exercises and training scenarios, they would be facing genuine unknown threats in actual combat conditions. For many, this would be their first real mission, the test that would determine whether their training had prepared them for the realities of Coalition military service. Cohorts 1 through 15 have been selected for this mission, the Commandant announced, causing Sarah to exchange glances with her teammates. They had made the list, despite the recent controversy surrounding the corridor incident. You will be divided into specialized teams based on your training focus and species capabilities. Mission briefings will begin immediately. As the assembly dispersed into smaller groups, Sarah found herself wondering whether their inclusion was a vote of confidence or a convenient way to test human capabilities under actual combat conditions. Either way, the opportunity was both thrilling and terrifying. The mission briefing for Cohort 12 took place in a secure chamber deep within the Academy's intelligence section. The walls were lined with classified data displays showing everything from stellar cartography to xenobiological threat assessments. Instructor Vexhai stood before them with 2 other officers Sarah hadn't seen before, a Vorthak colonel whose telepathic abilities were indicated by the distinctive neural implants visible at his temples, and a human commander whose presence immediately caught Sarah's attention. Commander Elena Vasquez was legendary among Coalition military personnel, one of the first humans to achieve flag rank and a veteran of conflicts that stretched across 3 decades. Her presence at the briefing suggested that the mission's importance extended far beyond a simple rescue operation. Kepler-7 is not just a research station, Commander Vasquez began without preamble. It's one of our most advanced facilities for studying void border phenomena.
The scientists there have been working on projects that could revolutionize our understanding of reality itself. The holographic display showed detailed schematics of the station, a massive structure built into an asteroid, with multiple levels and specialized laboratories designed to contain dangerous experiments. The technology visible in the displays was far beyond anything Sarah had encountered during training. 48 hours ago, the station transmitted a routine status report. Colonel Vexsky's telepathic voice touched their minds with precision. 6 hours later, they sent an emergency signal indicating an unknown intrusion.
Since then, complete silence. Instructor Vexsky manipulated the display to show tactical assessments.
Long-range sensors detect the station's basic systems are still operational, but there are no life signs.
No response to communication attempts. Most concerning, there are energy readings that don't match any known technology.
Sarah studied the data streams, trying to understand the implications. A research station going silent wasn't unusual. Dangerous experiments sometimes required communication blackouts for safety reasons. But the combination of unknown energy signatures and complete loss of contact suggested something much more serious.
Our mission parameters are threefold, Commander Vasquez continued. First, determine the fate of the research staff and evacuate any survivors. Second, secure or destroy any classified materials that could threaten coalition security. Third, identify and neutralize whatever caused the station to go silent. The briefing continued with detailed tactical assignments. Cohort 12 would be part of the advanced reconnaissance team, using their diverse capabilities to scout the station's interior before the main force arrived. Their small size and mixed species composition made them ideal for gathering intelligence in unknown situations. As they prepared for departure, Sarah couldn't help but notice the attention their cohort was receiving from other Academy personnel. Word of the corridor incident had spread throughout the Coalition military network, and everyone seemed curious to see how the humans would perform under actual combat conditions. No pressure, David muttered as they suited up in the equipment bay. Only the entire galaxy watching to see if we're worthy of being here.
Sarah checked her weapon systems one final time, ensuring that her energy rifle was properly calibrated and her armor's life support systems were functioning correctly. The gear was standard Coalition military equipment, but sized and modified for human physiology. It felt strange wearing it for a real mission instead of a training exercise. The transport ship that carried them toward Kepler-7 was a Coalition fast attack vessel, designed for rapid deployment and extraction operations. Sarah found herself in a troop compartment with recruits from multiple cohorts, all trying to balance excitement and nervousness as they faced their first real mission.
As the journey progressed, details about Kepler-7's research became clearer.
The station was studying something called dimensional interfaces, points where the normal rules of physics broke down and other realities bled through.
It was dangerous work, requiring constant monitoring and specialized containment procedures.
The energy readings we're detecting suggest that something may have emerged from one of these interfaces, Commander Vasquez explained during the final mission briefing. We need to be prepared for threats that don't follow conventional physics or military logic.
The warning proved prophetic.
As their transport approached Kepler-7, the sensor readings became increasingly bizarre.
The station appeared normal from the outside, its lights functioning and its structure intact.
But there were spatial distortions around certain sections, areas where the very fabric of space seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways. Teams 1 through 3 will enter through the main docking bay, Commander Vasquez announced over the communication system.
Teams 4 through 6 will use the emergency airlocks on level 7.
Team 7, your cohort will enter through the research section and work your way toward the command center. Sarah felt her heart racing as their insertion pods separated from the main transport. Through the viewports, she could see Kepler-7 growing larger, its asteroid-based structure riddled with lights and equipment that looked normal but somehow felt wrong. The spatial distortions were more visible up close, creating rainbow effects in space that hurt to look at directly. Their pod docked with the research section's emergency airlock with a gentle thud that seemed to echo strangely through the station's hull.
As they prepared to disembark, Kazak's telepathic voice touched their minds with unusual uncertainty. Something is wrong here.
The thoughts I sense from within the station are not right.
They feel human, but distorted. Changed, Sarah exchanged worried glances with David.
If the Vortac's telepathic abilities were detecting altered human consciousness, it suggested that whatever had happened at Kepler-7 was far worse than simple equipment failure or external attack. The airlock cycled them through its sterilization procedures with mechanical efficiency, but something felt different about the process. The light seemed brighter than normal, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. The air, when they were finally able to breathe it, tasted of ozone and something else, something metallic and strange. "Stay together," Torgon ordered as they entered the station proper. "Maintain communication at all times.
If anyone sees anything unusual, report it immediately."
The corridor they found themselves in looked normal enough, standard coalition construction with appropriate signage and emergency equipment positioned according to regulation.
But there were subtle details that set Sarah's nerves on edge.
The walls seemed to shimmer occasionally when viewed from the corner of her eye. The background hum of the station's systems carried harmonics that didn't quite sound right.
Most disturbing of all were the personal effects scattered along the corridor. A coffee cup sitting on a maintenance panel, still warm. A jacket hanging on a wall hook, swaying slightly despite the absence of any air currents.
A tablet displaying research notes that continued to scroll as if someone were still reading them.
"Where is everyone?"
THYSS whispered, her gravitational field causing the floating objects to orbit around her in nervous patterns.
That question was answered when they reached the first research laboratory.
Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see scientists at their workstations, apparently conducting normal research activities. But something was fundamentally wrong with the scene.
The scientists moved with perfect synchronization, their actions coordinated to an inhuman degree.
When one turned his head, all the others turned at precisely the same moment.
When someone reached for an instrument, the entire group performed identical gestures. Most terrifying of all was their faces.
The expressions were human, but empty of individuality. They wore the same slight smile, the same distant look in their eyes, as if they were all sharing the same consciousness.
"Kazak," Sarah whispered. "What are you picking up from them?"
The Vorthax's mental voice carried undertones of horror.
*1 mind.
All of them share one mind. But, underneath, I can sense their individual consciousness trapped, screaming. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow.
The station's personnel hadn't been killed, they had been transformed into something worse.
Some kind of hive mind or collective consciousness had taken control of their bodies while leaving their individual minds aware but helpless.
"We need to report this immediately," David said, reaching for his communication equipment.
But, when he tried to contact the command ship, only static answered his attempts. Torgon's colors shifted to patterns indicating alarm.
"The communication interference is growing stronger. Something is actively blocking our transmissions."
As if summoned by their conversation, one of the synchronized scientists in the laboratory turned to look directly at them through the window. The movement was perfectly coordinated with all the others, and the smile that spread across their faces was identical and deeply unsettling.
"They know we're here," THYSS said, backing away from the window.
The scientist closest to them placed his hand against the transparent aluminum and began speaking, his voice somehow audible through the barrier despite the lack of any visible communication system. "Welcome to Kepler 7, all the scientists said in perfect unison, their voices creating an eerie harmony.
"We have been waiting for you. The convergence is eager to meet its new components."
Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach as she realized the true nature of their mission. They weren't here to rescue the station's personnel, they were here to become part of whatever had taken control of them. But, as the laboratory doors began to slide open and the synchronized figures started moving toward them, Sarah found herself stepping forward instead of backing away. David was beside her, and her teammates were behind her, all looking to her for leadership in a situation that no amount of training could have prepared them for. The corridor incident had been about protecting one teammate from physical harm. This was about protecting her entire cohort and, potentially the entire coalition, from something that could steal their very souls. The galaxy was about to see what humans did when faced with threats that defied comprehension and enemies that couldn't be fought with conventional weapons. What it was about to witness would change the course of galactic history. The synchronized scientists moved toward Cohort 12 with the unsettling coordination of a single organism controlling multiple bodies. Their faces maintained those identical smiles, but their eyes held depths of malevolence that made Sarah's skin crawl. As they approached, the air itself seemed to thicken, carrying whispers in languages that hurt to hear. "Fall back to defensible positions," Torgon ordered, his crystalline structure blazing with combat patterns. But, even as he spoke, more laboratory doors were opening throughout the corridor, releasing additional controlled personnel. Sarah counted at least 20 figures converging on their position, all moving with that same eerie synchronization. But what made her blood run cold wasn't their numbers, it was the realization that these had once been coalition scientists, researchers, and support staff. People with families, dreams, and individual identities that had been subsumed into something alien and hostile.
Kazak, can you reach their minds? David asked as he backed toward a maintenance alcove. Maybe break whatever's controlling them? The Vortac's telepathic response carried undertones of strain and revulsion. I cannot.
The controlling consciousness is vast, ancient. It experiences these bodies as temporary vessels, nothing more. The original minds are trapped so deeply that any attempt to reach them might destroy them entirely. Sarah raised her energy rifle, but hesitated. These weren't enemy soldiers or hostile aliens, they were victims.
Shooting them would be like executing prisoners of war.
But, as the synchronized figures drew closer, their movements became more threatening, hands reaching out with grasping motions that suggested violence was imminent. There has to be another way, she said, more to herself than to her teammates. Something that can break the control without killing the hosts.
THYSS's gravitational field began to fluctuate as stress affected her concentration.
The Kalari have legends of mind parasites that consume consciousness. In the stories, only complete destruction of the host organism can stop the spread. The converging figures suddenly stopped moving, all of them turning to focus on Sarah with identical expressions of curiosity. When they spoke, their voices created a harmony that seemed to come from everywhere at once.
Interesting. The small human shows concern for enemy assets.
This suggests emotional compromise that will facilitate integration.
You will make excellent addition to the convergence consciousness. Sarah felt anger flaring in her chest. These aren't enemy assets, they're people.
And, whatever you are, you have no right to steal their minds. The synchronized laughter that followed was like broken glass in a wind chime.
Rights? Minds? Such limited concepts. The convergence transcends individual consciousness. Those you call people now experience perfect unity, freed from the chaos of singular thought. You will thank us for this gift.
As the figures resumed their advance, Sarah noticed something that the others might have missed. While the controlled personnel moved with perfect coordination, there were subtle variations in their physical responses. Some moved slightly slower than others. Some showed stress indicators that suggested their host bodies were fighting the control on a biological level. David, she whispered urgently. Look at their vitals displays. The medical monitors on their uniforms, they're showing different readings for each person.
David's eyes widened as he understood her observation.
The controlling consciousness may be unified, but it's still operating through individual biological systems. Each host has different physical capabilities and limitations. Which means, Sarah continued, her mind racing through tactical possibilities, it might be vulnerable to strategies that target biological functions rather than consciousness. Torgon's colors shifted to patterns indicating sudden comprehension.
Neural disruption.
If we can overload the biological systems without causing permanent damage, we might be able to break the connection temporarily.
Kazak's telepathic voice carried new hope. Yes.
The controlling entity relies on neural pathways to maintain its hold. Disrupting those pathways could force it to release its control to prevent host body damage. But they needed time to implement such a plan, and the controlled personnel were only meters away. Sarah could see the malevolent intelligence behind their eyes, studying Cohort 12's defensive positions and calculating the most efficient way to overwhelm them. That was when Sarah made a decision that would be discussed in coalition tactical manuals for generations to come. Instead of continuing to back away, she stepped forward, placing herself between the advancing figures and her teammates. Stop, she said, her voice carrying absolute authority.
I'm the one you really want.
The synchronized figures halted immediately, their heads tilting at identical angles as the controlling consciousness focused its attention on her.
Explain this statement.
Sarah could feel her teammates' alarm through their tactical network, but she pressed forward with her impromptu plan.
You said I showed emotional compromise. You're right. I'm the one who protected my teammate in the corridor incident.
I'm the one whose actions have caused so much debate throughout the coalition.
The controlled figures smiled wider, their expressions becoming predatory.
Yes. Your psychological profile has been studied.
The human protective instinct. Most fascinating. You will be an excellent test subject for integration procedures.
Then, take me, Sarah said, dropping her weapon and spreading her arms wide.
But let my teammates go. They're just following orders. I'm the one with the unusual psychological patterns. David's voice cracked with urgency. Sarah, what are you doing?
She didn't take her eyes off the controlled figures as she replied.
Something stupid that might just work. Trust me.
The controlling consciousness seemed to consider her offer, and Sarah could almost feel its alien intelligence weighing the tactical benefits of accepting her proposal. But what it didn't understand, what no truly rational consciousness could understand, was that her offer wasn't genuine. As the nearest controlled figure reached out to grasp her arm, Sarah triggered the plan she had been formulating since the moment she noticed their biological vulnerabilities. Instead of allowing herself to be taken, she grabbed the figure's wrist and activated her armor's emergency medical systems. The bioelectrical shock that coursed through both their bodies was designed to restart stopped hearts and stimulate paralyzed nervous systems. When channeled through direct physical contact, it created a neural disruption cascade that the controlling consciousness wasn't prepared for. The figure Sarah was touching convulsed and collapsed, his eyes flickering from empty malevolence to confused awareness before rolling back in unconsciousness. But the effect didn't stop there. The bioelectrical cascade propagated through the neural network that connected all the controlled personnel, creating a feedback loop that overloaded the controlling entity's ability to maintain its hold. One by one, the synchronized figures stumbled and fell as their individual nervous systems reasserted control. The perfect coordination shattered like crystal under stress, replaced by the beautiful chaos of independent consciousness. But Sarah's gambit came at a cost. The bioelectrical feedback that had disrupted the controlling entity also coursed through her own nervous system, sending spasms of pain through her entire body. She collapsed alongside the freed researchers, her armor's systems flickering as they struggled to compensate for the overload.
Sarah!
David was at her side immediately, checking her vital signs while Torgon and the others secured the area.
Medical support to our position, we have personnel down, including civilian casualties.
Through the haze of pain and disorientation, Sarah could hear the voices of the freed research staff as they regained consciousness. Confused, frightened, but undeniably human voices expressing individual thoughts and concerns. The sound was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard.
Is it over?
Dr. Helen Crawford, the station's chief researcher, asked as THYSS helped her to her feet. The last thing I remember was working late in the lab, and then, nothing. Just watching myself do things I didn't want to do. Kazak's telepathic voice, when it touched their minds, carried undertones of relief and admiration. The controlling entity has retreated deeper into the station.
It is weakened but not destroyed.
However, it no longer has the strength to maintain control over unwilling hosts. As coalition medical teams arrived and began treating the rescued personnel, the full scope of what had happened at Kepler 7 became clear. The research into dimensional interfaces had accidentally opened a gateway to something ancient and malevolent, an entity that existed as pure consciousness, seeking to expand itself by consuming and controlling other minds. The entity was still present within the station's deeper levels, but Sarah's desperate gambit had proven that it could be fought and defeated. More importantly, her actions had demonstrated something that would reshape the coalition's understanding of human psychology and military potential. Commander Vasquez arrived with the command team as Sarah was being treated for neural strain and bioelectrical burns.
The veteran officer's expression mixed professional assessment with something that might have been awe.
That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed, the commander said.
Possibly both.
But it worked. Dr. Kelson, who had arrived with the medical team, was recording everything for her official report.
Sarah, when you offered yourself to that entity, did you actually intend to be captured?
Sarah tried to sit up straighter despite the medical restraints holding her to the treatment bed.
No, ma'am.
I was counting on being able to disrupt its control through bioelectrical feedback.
The protective offer was just a way to get close enough to make physical contact.
You gambled your life and your sanity on an untested theory, Instructor Vexai observed, his colors indicating a mixture of approval and exasperation. I gambled my life to save my teammates and innocent people, Sarah corrected. The theory was just how I planned to win the bet. The distinction was crucial, and everyone present understood its implications.
Sarah hadn't acted out of reckless bravado or desperate heroism.
She had assessed an impossible situation, identified a potential solution, and executed a plan that required personal sacrifice to achieve success. It was, in many ways, the perfect example of what strategists were beginning to call the human factor, the ability to find creative solutions to impossible problems, combined with the willingness to accept personal risk for the benefit of others. As news of the Kepler-7 incident spread throughout the coalition, the debate about human military potential reached new levels of intensity. But, this time, the arguments were different. Instead of questioning whether humans belonged in the coalition's military forces, species throughout the galaxy began asking how they could better understand and utilize the unique perspectives that humanity brought to complex situations. 6 months later, Sarah found herself standing before the Coalition Council on Centauri Prime, receiving the Star of Valor for her actions at Kepler-7.
But, more important than the ceremony was the announcement that followed.
The Human Military Integration Program has exceeded all expectations, Chancellor Vexmar announced to the assembled representatives.
Human personnel will be expanded throughout coalition forces, with emphasis on roles requiring innovative thinking and adaptive problem-solving. As Sarah accepted the medal, she thought about the corridor incident that had started this entire journey.
Her instinctive decision to protect David from the Thessians' attack had set in motion events that changed not just her own life, but the fate of her entire species within the galactic community. Standing beside her on the awards platform were David, Torgon, Kazak, and THYS's Cohort 12, now graduated and assigned to prestigious positions throughout the coalition military. Their success had proven that diversity of thought and capability was a military asset, not a liability. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed humanity itself. No longer seen as weak creatures who needed protection, humans were recognized as beings whose courage and